Greetings, rabble rousers. My name is Jessa McLean. Welcome to Blueprints for Disruption, a weekly discussion dedicated to amplifying activism across Turtle Island. Together, we will examine tactics, explore motivations, and celebrate successes in disrupting the status quo. This podcast is a proud part of New Left Media. Welcome to the very first episode of Blueprints of Disruption. I'm so excited to kick this discussion off, not just because it's our first episode, but because I think we found the perfect starting point for a larger discussion on activism in Canada. When I first announced that I would be recording a podcast, I had quite a few people reach out, and one that stood out in particular reminded me that, if I was going to provide tools to activists across Canada, if we were going to encourage people to do direct action and to disrupt the status quo, then it was important that we start by teaching people how to keep themselves safe, teaching people how to keep their community safe and their movements safe. And so our first guest is Noodle, a community activist and an expert in operational security. OPSEC, we'll refer to it throughout the interview. When I first set up the interview with Noodle, my first intentions were to provide a 101 for activists, basic tools that they could immediately take into the field, particularly organizers. But what we ended up with was so much more than that. We gained insight into why security within movements is important. We learned the limitations on the tools that Noodle will provide. Why it's important to strike a balance between accessibility and security. Mostly, though, we'll learn how trust is built and what folks really mean when they say, "We keep us safe." Without any further hesitation, here's the interview with Noodle. So, welcome to Blueprints of Disruption. Today, we are going to be talking a lot about OPSEC and InfoSec, and maybe you don't even know what that means right now, but by the end of this conversation, I'm sure you will. Today, we have with us Noodle, a community activist. Noodle, can you introduce yourself to those who maybe have not met you?
Yes, hello, and I would hope that a lot of people wouldn't recognize or have met me, to be honest. I go by Noodle. I'm I guess, local community activist and slash organizer. I'm part of, a few groups in the, area known as Canada. I've been doing this for a number of years. I've always had kind of political leaning tendencies, but was radicalized, some years back as I got older and realized that a lot of things weren't necessarily as I was told.
You were radicalized at a young age, so to speak.
I mean, I would say that I was probably the early beginnings of my radicalization probably came from music that I listened to that I didn't really quite grasp the content of the lyrics. But there were seeds that were planted that made, a lot more sense when I was older. And I was able to put two and two together. I'm like, I understand. So.
Any tune in particular comes top to mind?
I would say a lot of the music that I listened to was labeled as, air quotes, counterculture, whether it's like the punk rock scene or the hip hop scene. There were just words to me when I was a lot younger that I would sing along with, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. And then, those lyrics and ideologies, kind of melded together when I was older and I had a little bit more grasp of things. But yeah, nothing in one thing in particular, but genres, Yeah.
Awesome. So you became politically aware, but what made you focus, not that all 100% of your focus is on this, but what made you really hone in on OPSEC and keeping activists safe? I mean, why do you go by Noodle?
Well, that's a good question. A question that I do have answers for. My first experiences with on the ground activism locally here. There was a couple of demonstrations and things that were happening. In the place that I was at, including a really large one about 10 years ago, where there was a massive police action and where hundreds of people were kettled and arrested, um, despite just not having actually done anything and had their lives, disrupted and potentially, sidetracked entirely for years as a result of, court proceedings and that kind of thing. And I guess I couldn't make any sense of why that would happen when people aren't doing anything wrong. And then I looked into more historical precedents of entire movements being shut down due to, these kinds of things being infiltrated or just completely disrupted by bad faith actors. And also just having seen people physically harmed and doxxed when using, their outright, I guess, identities without any concern for security or safety of the people around them and themselves. Um, yeah, at the end of the day, I think activism and security, maybe I should rephrase this. I think it's a really good question because activism and security should actually go hand in hand. So it shouldn't be one or the other. Um, it shouldn't be separate from each other. If you're doing activism, the idea is that you're changing, you're attempting to work towards a change in the status quo. As we know, the ones in power have no interest in that. That's the whole idea of activism, right? We need to be advocates for something against the greater, I guess we can use words like state or, ruling class, or, the reality is the ones in power that make all the decisions for us despite calling us a democracy.
And now it's not just the state, right? We have open fascists brazenly taking to the streets. I imagine security becomes a concern on that front too. But here we're talking more specifically protecting ourselves from the police. Now, I've been to large demonstrations that had similar outcomes, and I think I remained naive to the extent of what we needed to be doing. So, I mean, why do we have to protect ourselves against the police? A lot of people would ask us, right? Like, we're just organizing marches, perhaps shouting outside of MPP's offices, not doing anything quote unquote illegal.
That's a really common. That's a good question and a good way to phrase it, and it's really good food for thought. But so I would kind of respond with the whole kind of incorrect trope of like, if you've done nothing wrong, then you've got nothing to be afraid of line that people will often use to make apologies for police violence and state violence, and just in general, right? The whole overarching idea that, oh, it's okay, like, talk to police and give them all the information because you've done nothing wrong, so you won't, be harmed or convicted or arrested or anything. We know that that's not true. I mean, anybody that has an open mind or has been paying attention to police violence all across the world, but also very specifically to, Western, policing in North America, I should say, where it's an actual war. I mean, like, why would you need to? Why would you want to give them any more information that they can use against you and will use against you, regardless of whether or not you've done anything wrong? They just might not like the look of you. And at the end of the day, you've mentioned picketing outside MPP offices or protests. Those protests are aimed directly at challenging the status quo and the power. Um, I mean, your opponents are the ones that the police literally work for. Um, so, I mean, why would we need to defend ourselves from increased police activity? That's a that's something that I guess it would depend on where you fall politically in your ideology. Like, do you trust the police in the first place, or do you have a mistrust of police violence and misuse of powers?
That kind of brings me to a point that we were going to talk about later, but it seems like natural now. So it's not everybody's experience that they need to take certain precautions. It seemed if you were in Ottawa or, on the Capitol Hill, January 6th, they seemed untouchable, no concern for, protecting their personal identities. I've heard you speak, black bloc tactics, nothing. In fact, they were live streaming as they did a lot of them. So I think that goes to your point as to the systems that were challenging. But I mean, what were you thinking as you see this unfold? You give everyone warnings on what to do and how to be safe, and then you watch this with impunity.
I guess that speaks to the wider issue of the right wing has always had power on their side in terms of political power and police action, laws, mandates. They're the ones that write the laws. So they've had a false sense of security, or sorry, I shouldn't say false. They have had a real sense of security in terms of right wing players have generally never needed to or wanted to disguise themselves. I mean, this goes back many, many years and decades. Uh, but let's just take Charlottesville, for example. You have many of the outright neo Nazis feeling that they don't need to cover their identities. And the truth is that they didn't for a long time. Because, I mean, they're on the same side as the ones who enforce capital and, to use that big buzzword that is often misused, but fascism. Fascism is an actual political ideology. It's not just things that you don't like or somebody telling you to clean your room. But the side
Even if it
of
feels that way.
even if it feels that way, absolutely, and it's valid. I get it, and I understand language evolves and changes. But fascism is this very specific political ideology that's bent on capitalism as the primary source of oppression and exploitation. So a lot of those people, like you mentioned in the convoy or January 6th, don't feel that they need to hide. But, the state has done what they have needed to in a very minimal amount of things, like as you would use the term kid gloves. They've laid light charges on people and very few as scapegoats. So there really hasn't been any mass implications for the right wing to go underground at this point. But I mean, there's decades of historical precedent where leftists have been targeted for having their identities known by the police, by the state, by employers, by individuals. A lot of us have been personally doxxed by very violent individuals, state or not state. Um, and it kind of teaches you real quick that you should take some basic safety precautions, because a lot of us have people in our lives that we don't want to see hurt uh, in any way, shape, or form. Whereas the right wing knows that they are on the side of capital, essentially, which is the winning side. Sorry, I shouldn't say the winning side, the power side. So there's a huge imbalance there.
Definitely. I mean, it was enraging as an organizer to watch because it's like I gave you this example when we spoke before, but I organized a series of rotating protests outside of MPP's offices back a few years ago for the Fight for 15 and Fairness. And every time I would be in my vehicle driving to the location, or perhaps a few hours before, I would get a call from a police officer identifying himself as a community liaison officer. He would just let it be known that he knew where I was going. He knew who was going to be there, would review all of the bylaws and laws that I should be aware of, despite, being on the phone with me the week before. And although that did clue me into, my number was not on any of the places. I know that the police, they have resources, but still I thought, like, I'm not doing anything illegal. I don't care if they know who I am. But, I didn't take into consideration the social mapping, the danger I could be putting my comrades in. I also did not anticipate ever being charged for the outcome of, any property damage.
Oh my
We're
God,
seeing that
not
as
property damage.
no,
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 sorry.
no, no, no. Worst case scenario is a broken window at Starbucks. We know this, but those things never crossed my mind. They do now, obviously, because we're seeing a lot of Black Lives Matter protesters, especially in the United States, facing felony charges, right?
Absolutely.
For doing kind of what seems like an innocuous, needed protest, things that we do quite often, and with such serious repercussions. I don't know if you know any specific examples you want to share, or can kind of speak to that, how the need has become perhaps more obvious to folks, that we're not just protecting, ourselves as organizers, but also the communities.
It's like one of those things. Like this is such. I'd like to kind of go back to basics a little bit, right? So I guess like one of the things that when we talk about security culture, a lot of times, especially people newer to this, will kind of brush it off and be like, listen, like we're not, like, again, like you mentioned, with your very specific examples that are really helpful, like we're not doing anything illegal. Like, like we have the leader of, the Liberal Party and also the Prime Minister going on TV every single time there's like a protest that makes the news, that says you have a right to protest and that's the cornerstone of democracy. But you have to do it peacefully and within the law. I mean, you hear something like that and be like, yeah, okay, I can go organize, a left leaning or whatever, protest outside an MPP because the prime minister says so. But I mean, like, protest has never worked if it falls specifically in the guidelines of what the people you're protesting allow you, how they allow you to protest. Right. So if anything that challenges their power, they are going to take a look at it and they are not going to like it. They don't, the government has no interest in peaceful protest or protest of any kind. The misnomer of peaceful protest is it's false.
When you say that, when you say that peaceful protest is false, you mean in the eyes of the state, essentially, or just the very act of disruption is violence?
Yeah, and it also like puts people on the side of this protest is only legit because we deem it as peaceful. This protest is not legitimate because a window was broken or that somebody punched a fascist in the face. Right? Like it's like, so my protest is only valid and legitimate if it's deemed peaceful, as in it falls within the guidelines and the law of what the power that I'm protesting allows. Like it's a very much of a misnomer and very much weaponized language that media will use, right? Oh, this is a peaceful protest, right? Whereas since that completely delegitimizes any other protest that is deemed not peaceful by the state, and as soon as they deem it not peaceful, out comes the tear gas and the horse. Sorry, that's another subject. That's another subject itself. But it does go hand in hand with activism and the need for security, because in the eyes of the state, any left protest or any protest that is going against their power or their narrative is not going to be considered peaceful in their eyes anyway.
It's almost like if you haven't grasped their attention, you're likely not doing it right.
I mean, in a sense, yes, absolutely. Like they're not concerned with A to B marches so much anymore. They're worried about property damage. They're worried about what they call rioting, right? An A to B march is very kind of like essential, and it's good for solidarity and community building and making noise. But an A to B march that's deemed peaceful, which I mean we've seen by the weekly air quotes freedom fighters for the anti-mandate and anti-vax folk, how they're freely allowed to march every single week in large masses through downtown core without any sort of police disruption. I mean, like,
Or permits.
or permits, and that really doesn't really accomplish anything either, whether it's the left or the right at the end of the day. But those marches combined with political action are power, right? And they're scared of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, although like they don't accomplish anything in terms of disruption or, perhaps getting the response from the state, it does, help to build movements in a way, right?
Absolutely, it's like it's essential, right? A show of solidarity in the streets is very powerful, but it can also be very demoralizing when 20 people show up to something.
I've been there,
instead
brother.
of yeah, instead of
So you just hope
yeah.
hope for the best sometimes, and yeah.
Mhm. And it's interesting how much resources the police and right wing will, I guess, allocate to shutting even those down. It's actually really really amazing. Like, just like, really. So again, it goes to the need for, why do we make their jobs easier when we can take a few security tips, um, security practices that we can incorporate into our workflow, just to make their lives a little bit more difficult, without really making your life any harder. So I guess that's
Let's
kind
talk
of the
about
crux of
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we
let's
can
talk
get
about
into
that.
that.
Like, so I'm a we call it like a small time organizer, I suppose. So
As we
what are
all
some
are, you know.
until we get together and do big things, right?
Absolutely, many parts make one big.
What are some of the basic things, the most accessible things that you would tell people to just start doing besides being aware of their presence online, right? I think that's step one. First, kind of acknowledging all the places you are, your photo, your name, your friends lists, what you like and don't like. But I think people are becoming more hyper aware. What do we do now?
I mean, okay, so there's a terminology that sounds like super like militaristic, blah blah blah, but terminology of threat modeling, right? So maybe if a good place to start is if you're an activist, like, what are you concerned about first and foremost? Like, what do you do, and what threat are you worried about? Are you worried about state surveillance? Are you worried about somebody you're arguing with online not having access to all of your personal information, like where you live and where you work, etc.? Or are you interested in building a bigger movement that's going to challenge state power, and you don't want to be disrupted and shut down internally before that even gets off the ground? So there's like, those are like kind of three different
It's like
small
yes, yes,
examples.
and yes.
Yes, like, do we, and like, and the thing is, like, do we want to make it easier for people? And then this also brings up the thing where a lot of people, especially who are newer to organizing, who have never experienced bad shit happening to them, is I'm not afraid, I'm not scared, let them come, I have nothing to hide. Well, to that I say, you should be afraid. Because it doesn't matter what reality is, because politicians, like, power structures lie to maintain power. It doesn't really matter if you think you have anything to hide or not. It can be used. Information will be used against you. We see this with disinformation and misinformation and improperly reported stories, where they choose specific language to reframe everything, or they'll take some of the content that you have on your personal pages or old pictures and take it completely out of context. And now, even though you haven't actually done what they're saying, in the world's eyes, you have. So,
Wait, Noodle,
mhm.
Noodle, you're not implying the police would fabricate evidence from the trove of stuff that you've put online. They don't do that for small-time fish like me, do they?
Yeah. They would absolutely never lie in court or fabricate evidence, even for something as benign as a speeding ticket.
Yeah, no, I've never known anyone to personally experience that for a $200 fine. I can only imagine if larger things are on the line. But so what do I do with my Facebook account then, Noodle? Like, I am everywhere, and a lot of people are, right? We've really exposed ourselves. Um, how do we still remain visible so people can find us and we can build those networks you're talking about to overthrow capitalism, but also at the same time make sure that the more subversive work that needs to be done isn't thwarted or infiltrated or stymied in any way?
There's that's a really good question, and I guess for like a lot of people, they have that question, right? Like, I want to be part of the part of the movement. I would like to be vocal. I would like to contribute to the community. And then you have a lot of other people who are not so much, that's not really their priority. They just want to do work on the ground. They want to do work and do their part, and they're not really concerned with so much needing, more of an open facing kind of online presence. So I guess I would break it down in two different ways. If you need an online kind of like open kind of profile where people know who you are, and you want to kind of bring more of the mainstream into the fold and just kind of start working in that world, then yeah, that's fantastic. There are still a lot of security things that you can do with, just not having anybody else's information that's in your life on your Facebook, or um, we can talk about compartmentalization, where you would leave any sort of spicy kind of activism and organizing off of your main public profile facing. Any of your spicier hot takes would be relegated to more of an anonymous kind of type profile. Um, but I guess it's really different for a lot of people. But the main takeaway is not to make their jobs any easier. We already know that there's a real problem with data and privacy on all the social media apps, including Facebook, especially Facebook, which we know they roll over immediately for law enforcement. So, your entire online life can be dissected with one subpoena request to Facebook, and they'll just hand it all over. You can download your own information from Facebook and see how that can be misused if you want to take a look.
No, on a side note, the NDP makes you do that if you want to be a candidate, including your private group chats. You need to submit that to HQ. So
That's
talk
kind of
about keeping your
fucky.
circles safe. It's
That
garbage.
is
I won't do it. I won't submit myself to that anymore. But if you want to be a candidate, you have to do that, which means, when we're unsafe like that and we behave in ways like that, it endangers all the people around us, right? You might be like, oh, I've got nothing to hide, but you have no idea what your comrades,
absolutely,
what their circumstances might be or what you're exposing them to. And,
absolutely. So let's take, for example, like you post a spicy meme with with a spicy caption. That's your take for the day. Let's see, right? Like it's public, it gets shared, a couple thousand times. Somebody that sees it doesn't really like you for whatever reason, or doesn't like the content because it hits them. It hits them right where it was meant to hit them for whatever reason, right? All they got to do is click on your page now. And if you have information about, let's say your partners, like heaven forbid your children, um, why are we exposing them to that kind of vitriol? Like we're so fired up that we feel the need to make a post like this with some with content or words that you've written or sentiments that you have that are going to upset the right wing. Why are we opening ourselves up to be targeted in personal lives, whether it's employment or the people around you? That's the main thing. Like there's a real problem with clout. We clout chasing in all circles, right? Like that's another thing that we should at some point touch on, whether it's are you clout chasing or are you doing activism? There's overlap for sure, but there's
and that results in kind of like a bit of overexposure. Is that what you're?
overexposure without any kind of like concern for safety for the people around you. I don't want to have my partner or partners or people in my family approached at their workplaces or even socially, because it's clear that due to very easy social mapping, if my shit's all public, um, I don't want them questioned over my politics. I don't want them questioned over my beliefs, or heaven forbid, hurt or
Yeah, and I
targeted.
think like anybody who doubts that that's a possibility has clearly not been doxxed before or had a friend doxxed for their political views. Like,
Absolutely. And I think like one of the daunting things about like, and I believe that you've steered the conversation towards like what can we do as opposed to just talking about like these concepts at a higher level is that one of the things that I would do on my personal, I would at least look at my privacy settings immediately. Like I use Facebook as an example a lot because they make it kind of a little bit they don't tell you what your privacy settings are. So it's just kind of a good practice to see like, is my friends list public? That's like one of the main things that you should never have public, in my opinion, because what's the point of it? Like, there's really no point beyond like, oh, do I have any mutual friends with this person? Well, that's kind of okay, cool. You can see that, but like, does it really change whether or not you're going to be friends with this person on Facebook, for example? Right? I don't want people to see everybody who I'm friends with because that's just entirely thrown my entire community under the bus, whether they're even activists or not. That's like one of the main things. And make your profile not searchable from Google, because that's, I mean, if anybody wants to Google your name or any search engine your name, if it's not visible to, you're giving them so much information and power just by saying, yes, please index my entire social media profile on the search engine. Please, like, why would, like, there's no need for that. So that's like one thing.
And what about photos? It's hard to have a Facebook photo. I mean, you can put an anonymous photo up there, but I mean, are folks that are already out there and likely flagged. People, again, will use me as an example because there's a lot of people like me where our political views are known
Mm-hmm.
and our faces and our names. So would these steps help us at this point?
They would
Are
help
we
your
still making it?
community.
They help our community, and that's the
Yeah,
point,
it
right?
would help your community, and that's what it's all about, right? Like, if you're already out there and you're already targeted, I mean, again, the same applies. Like, why are we making it easier for them? Regardless of what information they do have, why are we giving them more information? So, for somebody who's out like that and you have a presence and a platform, I guess that's what the difference is. Do you have a platform or do you not have a platform? What are you using the platform for? So I think it's generally two very different measures that are under the same security umbrella for, like, is your goal to grow your platform in the movement? So I shouldn't say your platform, but is your goal to use your platform to grow a movement? Or is your kind of online activity more of an individualistic kind of profile? So
And
that's where
that'll
I
that'll
would make a
vary for
difference.
everybody, right?
That'll
Like,
vary for everybody, right? So some people's platform could be their own personal page that they make public posts. And I would assume that most of those people that are doing those kind of posts will have some kind of experience, or I would hope that they would have some experience and understand that they're not going to throw their community under the bus. So they're not going to talk ever about somebody else's actions, that they'll speak for themselves. And at the same time, keeping their communities safe by not giving out any information on their communities or saying so and so did this and it was awesome, that kind of thing. So differentiate between whether or not you're using a platform to grow a movement, or if you're just a single person that's politically active.
what about any other tools outside of Facebook? What are there tools or apps that activists should definitely be using over other more commonly used, like Google Docs is our favorite.
Get off Google Docs
Oh
entirely.
no.
Yeah, entirely get off. There are alternatives to Google Docs where you can have like shared, real live, real time updating on like a notepad that everybody's working on, or a Word document, or that kind of stuff. Any of that. There are alternatives out there. Rise Up has a very basic kind of pad that's secure end-to-end encryption. They also have secure email run by activists and anarchists, like it's all complete anonymous and end-to-end encryption. And there are more and more kind of like shared services that are not Google. Google is bad because, again, they're like Facebook. They will literally, at the drop of a hat, divulge all information. Stop using Gmail for activism. um, Again, all Google products are going to be highly surveilled at the drop of a dime. They just give it up. They don't have any interest in not giving it up. So
In
it
fact,
doesn't.
they have a vested interest in giving it
Absolutely.
up, right? This is capital with a
Absolutely.
with a capital C.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.
I
So
have a lot of work to do, Noodle.
it's
I
okay. A
have
lot of
not
us
been
do. And
secure.
it can sound kind of daunting, and at first it is, right? So I think one thing that we have to keep in mind, that these are small, like, yeah, I mentioned briefly when we were talking about, like, there's, for example, let's take two-factor authentication. A few years ago, a lot of people didn't want to have to deal with that because it just takes them a little bit more time and brain power, which is true, it's valid. At the same time, it's like now it's kind of accepted that we would use two-factor authentication, and how culture and society learned and incorporated that into their normal kind of air quotes workflow is the amount of scams and fraud that was happening and people getting locked out of their accounts because somebody else is, I mean, and that causes people to adjust their behavior. So let's bring that into more of a security thing. Once you've had experience of being on the receiving end of having poor security and having that weaponized against you, you adjust your methods, right? So my thing is, let's not wait for that. If it hasn't happened to you, is that there are small things that we can do. We can start with, I talk about a lot of concepts, but I'll just briefly mention some of the things you can get a secure email. You can have a Rise Up email for free as well, or a Proton mail, which is fully end-to-end encrypted. Um, those are like that's like the main thing. Just get yourself an encrypted email. Just even when you sign up for newsletters or that kind of stuff. Like, why are we giving Google, who is, in my opinion, just as bad as the state, uh, more information? Why are we signing up for everything in our lives with Google products? And linking all of our social accounts. Like, that's just bad. It's bad practice. And we can get out of it.
To one another, you mean, our Twitter is linked to our Instagram, which gives out our email address. And okay.
Absolutely. So you can get, like, so okay, so here's the thing. Like, as leftists, I'm sure that a lot of people have seen like play by play entire doxes on bad players on the right wing. As in, you go onto a Twitter thread or something like that, and we have, the names of all their associates. We know what they did in, going back to high school and that kind of shit, where they work, where they live, things that they've said. You can just apply that same methodology to people using that on the left. I mean, I know how much information I can get with somebody that has a public facing profile, or for somebody that doesn't take security as a concern. And I have added a lot of information that was not necessarily known just from having somebody who's super violent at a protest, and we take a photo. We're like, who is this? We need information. And lo and behold, a day later, using your network of people just doing stuff that anybody can do without any sort of like expertise, air quotes, like, they've made it easy. And the same can be done for the left, and has been done, and is getting done. So just kind of use that as a frame of reference for, why do I need security? I don't know. You might say something that a Zionist might not like online, and then all of a sudden that person happens to be in with a bunch of far right players who are violent, and they go to your profile and they give all that information to them. This is where we have lists, and it's bad. It's bad.
I imagine, Noodle, that when you go into spaces knowing what you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, are you then relieved? Because when I think of all of the security precautions, I have concerns about accessibility, right? Anytime we try
Absolutely.
to
Totally
introduce even
valid.
a new platform, a new app, we lose a few folks sometimes, resistance to diving into new technology. So but it must also give a sense of security to the group, knowing that at least some precautions are being taken. That, Noodle, you could come into a space that I've created and know that you didn't have to expose yourself, or that the communications you had with me would be encrypted. So
Absolutely.
um yeah, I guess not everyone's going to be convinced that they need to take these steps. So what do you do when not everyone you're communicating, obviously, on your end is encrypted, and but you have to send it to their Gmail? And
That's a very valid. That's super valid, and it's an issue, for both reasons: accessibility issues and also security issues. Right? They're kind of okay. So let's use that was a really good example of, like, let's say we've introduced a new app. We're trying to get everybody in our circles on board with it, but there's somebody, um, who doesn't have access to the same level of technology, or the digital literacy required for security. Um, I think it's beholden upon the community to make sure that everybody, um, can access to it. and be trained and be basically prepped on why we're doing this. And it's not about alienation and it's not about elitism. It's about community care. So reframing this whole, why am I doing all this just to do this? Be like, okay, well, why do you do any community care? Um, and the accessibility issue that you have, let's say, for example, I'm going to use an example of, like, let's say something like a Marshall group chat for an upcoming demo. Okay, this is an example that's kind of really easy to relate to. Let's just say there's an open call for marshals for an upcoming rally or protest that you're interested in attending. You've never done anything like that before, but you're interested. You want to do it. You want to do your part. And somebody asks you to, kind of download Signal to get on this, and you're like, well, why do I need to use an app just to be part of this? In my opinion, it's our job to kind of like steer and explain that it's not about personal security, even when they say that it's, I'm not scared. I'm angry. I want to participate. We just reframe as security culture is community care because we don't want to see any of us get locked up or targeted. And we will help you with this. And we try to introduce like technology roles. Like none of us used smartphones before smartphones came out. None of us used cloud services before cloud services came out. So it's just another learning curve and introduced to your workflow. Like we understand how to install and download apps for the most part, right? Especially if the person that's saying that they don't want to download a new app when they already use all the different socials, we can say, okay, well, honestly, like our priority when we do community organizing is the community. So please just like leave that attitude at the door. And there's a reason why we're doing this. And it's not because we want to gatekeep or alienate. It's because we actually care. We actually care about the safety of our people. And we don't want to have to be, you know, targeted because nobody's taking care of security, or when there's any sort of light kind of vetting, like, oh, like who is this person that now wants to do activism that might be deemed illegal by the state? Like we want to keep each other safe. It's kind of like that, and it doesn't have to be alienating. It shouldn't be alienating. I should rephrase that. It should never be alienating.
I think that's so important to deliberately go out of your way to frame it as community care, as it is, but because it's not overtly such, right? These are kind of personal security adjustments that we usually see as keeping our privacy safe. Privacy is very individualistic. So, allowing the community to understand that, because as leftists, we are out there because we care about our community. So there's, if they're rejecting that kind of basis for doing what we need them to do, then that's a red flag in itself, right? Because you mentioned a marshal chat. Well, usually you have to train marshals too for the first time, right? So if we can train them to marshal, we can train them to use Signal if needed. Or, yeah, that's, I think like sometimes when we talk about these security measures, we forget that part, that it's not just for us, and that we need to explain it that way. Even though it's a list of things for you to do, you're doing that for the people around you. And as we become more hyper aware of like how much we expose our friends, I think it becomes obvious. So you talked about marshals. Let's talk about on the street a little bit. Eventually we'll all end up there. Am I right? So, how do we keep each other safe when we're at demonstrations? Not just, to prevent against tear gas or things like that. No martial training needed, but for post event, what do we do so that we don't get in trouble after? Regardless if we did something wrong, because we know that that's not always the case.
Are we approaching this from a sense of like as an organizer or as a participant?
Well, I guess from an organizer, because it's our job to make sure participants know these things. You can't just ask people to come out to a march without providing them any kind of safety guidelines. So let's approach it from what an organizer must make sure folks know. the buddy system would be an example, right? If you want to talk about that, most people imagine that's just for children or when we go out drinking or whatnot. We used to have it at raves when we go, and but I have not employed it on the streets, and I heard you talk about that, and I underlined it here because as an organizer, I felt really irresponsible for never implementing something like that. I won't make that mistake again. But what are other things that, we should be saying to folks before they show up so that they are equipped and, can protect themselves as best as possible?
Good question. I do believe that it's an organizer's responsibility to put that kind of messaging out there. So yeah, it's a great question. Some of the things that an organizer can do pre and post, in my opinion, is just to never make sure it's something as simple as not making your guest list public. A lot of people don't. More and more people are doing that now, thankfully. But in the past, if you have your guest list public, I mean, all it takes is for one person to click on there and take screenshots of all the names for potential use later. So that's like step number one. Step number two is I should preface this with that, like every org has different needs. This is for my personal take on a local organized event as an organizer. So, just to make sure that safety is kept in mind, and that goes beyond the whole tear gas thing and police violence thing, as in maybe don't, if you're going to be very local and very vocal and seen at a protest, i.e., carrying spicy signs or yelling and heckling and that kind of thing, and engaging, um, maybe try not to use your real name and have your face shown, just for anybody can snap a pic and they have your name, and then that begins their easy search if you have a public profile and your entire social network is mapped, just to say. And if you're posting pictures online, just don't have people's faces in it. It's as
Is that
simple
for
as
all the
that.
clout chasers?
That's for all the clout chasers, and it's just people that are also just not mindful of it, right? Let's just say you go to a protest that ends up with a police action in terms of police violence, and you've been live streaming all day, not mindful of people's faces that just happen to be there, in solidarity with the rally, that had no intention of being doxxed. They're part of your community, right? If you're live streaming and their faces are front and center, you're getting their names and that kind of stuff, those people can be very easily targeted too. So just be mindful of the images that you post, the words that go with it, like being like, oh yeah, like, um, I was there and this happened. Like, don't throw anybody under the bus or don't make it easier for them. Always keep community safety in mind and push that, as in we keep each other safe. That kind of messaging a lot of people will look at an event posting and just be like, yes, I need to go to this, but then have zero concern for safety for themselves or others.
Yeah, especially newcomers or folks that we're not asking anything illegal of them, right? So
Absolutely not.
it would be completely normal for them to think that they could just show up in their favorite sloganed T-shirts and with
Oh,
their baby strapped to their back and
yeah,
ready to
totally.
roll.
Like outside of like doing black bloc or what have you, which is, for those that aren't in the know, just like in the practice of wearing all black, no logos showing, covering the face, and just looking as one unit, an anonymous unit. Short of that, just, don't wear identifying features. Don't have your tattoos showing. Tattoos will be one of the main identifiers. Um, and people, again, I'm already hearing the voices in my head. Well, I'm not scared. I'm not scared. If anything, if anybody who's listening to this, like having a hard time following, if anything, your takeaway is, listen, it's not just about you and your own personal fear. It's, again, community, community, community. All right. So if any, as an organizer, that should be stressed. Like that's just my whole thing. A lot of organizers don't.
And it's empowering to provide these tools and to teach people to
It
keep them safe,
absolutely
right?
is.
And to keep each other safe. Because most of the spaces that we create are hell bent on recreating our ideal community, right? If we think back to Occupy, if anyone was there, I mean, that's what that was all about in that park too, was recreating a space that was ideal to us. And for sure, there was police infiltration um,
Absolutely.
during that action that was very detrimental, in my opinion. Um, so I totally understand, although it took a conversation with you, to be honest, to really have me second guess a lot of the approaches that I've been using, or lack of security approaches that I've been using, because I was fearless for myself. And I don't think I thought I was enough trouble. I don't think I'm enough trouble for anybody. But, why wait to that point before you start implementing just some basic new habits, right?
Yeah, just some new habits in your, like, again, it's not changing the entire way that you live your life. Like, nobody's saying don't use email, don't use social media. I mean, that would be ideal, but then, but we're not there, right? So the idea is that, social media is a powerful tool one way or another, right? And we know this. Like, we know it can be used for, the proverbial binary good and evil, and we know this. So, I mean, we just have to take precautions, um, and just don't make it easier. Just repeat that in your head. Don't make it easier for the opposition. Don't make it, of course, we can't be 100% secure in everything we do. And also, there really is truth to the matter that over, I guess, like, security culture for the sake of security culture can be alienating. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. Um, like, there's people that will sometimes get too carried away with people not doing security culture, as opposed to, trying to encourage it and teach the importance and necessity and demonstration of love and care for your community through trying to teach security culture. So we don't want to go overboard either. Like, the last thing I want to do is have somebody who's really, like, new to activism, or newer to community activism, I should say, completely being turned off by coming into a space and not practicing good security culture, and then having everybody jump down their throats without explaining and showing community care and love. It's one thing to say security culture is care and love, and it's another thing to completely do the opposite of it, of demonstrating that care and love. So,
Because, yeah, in order to grow, we constantly have to invite strangers into our
absolutely,
spaces. And
absolutely.
there has to be a level of trust. So, it was really eye opening to, like, have these conversations with you, because then I understand that's part of building the community as well, is making sure that they are safe and that they know they're entering in a safe space, but that you'll also walk them through it. um I do. I want to use you as an example, if you don't mind, because you do say, you don't have to go through a loss of, identity, but we call you Noodle. Do you feel like you've lost a sense of identity and the level of security that you have taken? And
No, in other, to be honest, I mean, the noodle and is not a separate entity to who I am, right? It's just a different part of myself that I've been able to compartmentalize, right? So I use Noodle as an alias, and I think that, first of all, we can get named by our communities or give ourselves names, and who the fuck doesn't want to do that? Right? Like, we have a whole anyway. So to speak to that, I don't feel like I've lost any of my identity, because, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, I guess depending on the way, politics is life, right? Ideology is a system, that we kind of, believe in, and live our principles to it. And part of mine includes security culture and keeping my community safe, right? Whether it's, my front facing persona, where I have to go to work every day and that kind of thing, um, they go hand in hand with each other. I don't it's also just like a form of compartmentalization, right? Like I have spent, a few years trying to figure out that balance for myself because I don't want to go overboard with, super strict security, and then I've completely alienated myself from my online community as well. I don't want to, so I just chose to separate the two. Whereas my politics are, you know, kind of limited to an anonymous kind of name, but it's not an anonymous person. You know what I mean? To myself, like they're not different people.
Well, that's good to hear because you talk about, your online presence, and during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that's all we had. I felt like
Absolutely.
my entire identity was through my online interactions with people, whether that be public facing or not. So I guess, like, yeah, as we open up, perhaps that's not such a big concern, but I guess people will still want to just find ways to connect and live vicariously through each other's lives, or whatever it is that we get through that social media, on
Mm-hmm.
top of movement building and, drawing people to you and to your work. Um, but it's nice to hear that you have found balance, because um, yeah, I worry about removing some of those elements, and what that will be like, and will I lose connections. But I think I'm understanding better that there's just even small steps that I can take that's within my personal comfort zone that will at least keep my immediate contacts safer, um,
Absolutely, and
without
that's the
kind of
whole goal.
going dark, right? Because we can't be completely underground either. That
No, you
itself
can't.
is a red flag.
And anybody who's doing that already understands the risks. I would hope anybody who's chosen to go completely underground in their activism and organizing understands the implications of that to their personal lives, right? So, unless you're planning on doing that, there's no reason to completely go underground, right? So, because that is a red flag, as you've mentioned, right?
So you talked about keeping things separate, not siloed. You use a word I can't possibly.
Compartmentalization.
Don't make me do it. So you talked about how you can do it as an individual,
Yeah,
but we can do that as organizations too, even
one
the
hundred
most
percent.
basic grassroots of us, rabble rousers.
Yeah, that is actually, in my opinion, a little bit more important, right? So, um, the I guess maybe I should say the status quo is not really introduced in my opinion introduced so much in the individuals, but they are introduced they're interested in the organization power, right? So I think compartmentalization is arguably way more important for organizations. So, um,
And how do we do that?
well, that would depend on the org. I don't mean to say that like flippantly. I would
No,
just
fair.
there's very much you know like you touched on NDP asking for to vet social media, like that is like, I mean, that's one way to do it, but like, so what? I'm a little confused about it. What are they not looking for? What are they looking? But I mean, a way for an org to do that is to have different arms of the org. I guess you have your front facing, and then you just have your internal, kind of AGs, affinity groups that understand the need that some things need to be a little bit less public facing, and they can compartmentalize by using only secure internal comms and not and compartmentalization also includes, just because we're in the same org doesn't mean that we have all of the same relevant information to what we're doing. You can separate that kind of thing, right? For example, if somebody is doing something a little bit spicy as part of your org, or there's something that's planned that might be deemed illegal in the eyes of the law, then there's no reason for everybody in that org to be part of the planning if they're not partaking or have really no kind of relevancy to that action. So compartmentalization would be, okay, let's break off into a subgroup and keep this between us. That's not supposed to be alienating. That is supposed to be security, right? So,
It's almost limiting culpability, right? You're not saying you're not in this new chat because we don't trust you. It's because you don't need to be, and we're unnecessarily exposing you
Yeah,
when you don't need to be, and then we are all exposed if we keep it on this channel.
absolutely. Things
I
like that,
understand.
right? It's just
That's
understanding.
delicate, right? Like, how do
It
you
is
not
delicate.
make people feel like they're left out, right? There needs to be that conversation as to, why it's important, why there's a locked channel, what is, generally what is happening there, as opposed to just not being allowed in it.
And these are important internal organization conversations that I think have a broader social implication of why do we feel the need to know everything about every part of everything and partake in it? Like is that an ego thing? Is that a
Some of
cloud
us are
thing?
type A personalities, right? We got to
We
micromanage
sure
everything.
I do, and I have that personality, right? Like I do, but again, it's a learned behavior, right? Once I started to understand that, you know what, like you literally are not involved in the planning of this. You don't. I'm speaking for myself. And like you don't actually need to know any of this. Sure, you want to know because we all love tea, right? Right? Like, but like if I happen to get picked up for something unrelated, or if police sees my devices, and I wasn't even in that, then what would have been the point beyond my own curiosity and need to know, right? Again, these are internal org conversations that need to happen. How is it structured, right? Like, does everybody, can we all agree on this, that this is about community care? So again, it's different for every org.
I would say, like, I've definitely been in spaces where security has been a concern, but not a forefront. And then I've been in many, many more spaces where there is zero. Well, I guess we do some things inherently, like keeping certain things separate and, but not in a very productive way, now that I'm looking back at it. And I think I've not done a good job in terms of also explaining, the levels of secrecy that might exist in organizing and whatnot. So definitely I feel like, when we have meetings on comms, when we have meetings on events, like there needs to be a security discussion from the onset, and folks kind of responsible for that, to keep it up to date and to onboard people to an extent. And I think that might be missed in quite a few circles. So I'm hoping people are listening to this and kind of understanding it's time to take a look at our practices, a second look.
Yeah, that's a really good main takeaway. And it's not like this is so nowadays in the age of the internet, there's way more information available to all of us in data on on historical precedent too. So even before the advent of the computer and the internet, security was a problem in all left political activism circles, whether it's through infiltration or doxing or guilty by association, right? So it's not like this has come out of a vacuum. Like this is has always been there, but has been a lot more of a very overt problem now with the advent of the internet. So I guess like the main, like again, I just want to stress that this should not be alienating, and there are ways to implement this right off the ground, like you're saying, comms team on an org. Like, does the comms team actually understand the communication tools that they're using? Do they understand how that data is used, how exposed it is? And it's also the comms team's job, in my opinion, to now bring this knowledge and information forth to the rest of the org, and then you can all deal with it in turn, like as an org. Like, let's make decisions on this based on community care, as opposed to effort and other considerations. The main consideration should be community care.
Because, yeah, like we are, like you said, we're going out there and we're definitely challenging the state, we're challenging capital. And if you haven't met resistance yet, you likely will,
If you
as we
haven't
go
met
on in time.
resistance yet, maybe you're not actually against the status quo. Maybe you're actually on the side of the status
You got to
quo.
step up your game a little bit if you haven't even had a community liaison officer call you.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. It's
That's the
like,
marker of progress. Well, yeah, same with when you get docs, or folks, your enemies are extremely upset with you. It is almost a badge of honor to know that you are at least on the right path.
totally, like, if like in some ways, right, like we don't want to go too far overboard for the sake of martyrism, which is also a problem in white spaces, very much so. But that's another subject, right? But we have like, I'm not white for anybody who's listening, so um, there's like the whole thing of like, shit, what was my point there beyond dunking on white people and martyrs?
So, that's always fun, though. No.
Obviously, we don't want that increased surveillance and action on the boot of the state. We don't want that to happen. But the fact of the matter is, if you slightly challenge the narrative at all, you will get that pushback. So, like no, like all protests are palatable if the systems of power agree with you, like essentially, right? So any protest that the systems of power don't agree with is not okay to the state.
And if we're not disrupting, I mean, what are we doing?
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
like we talked earlier, there are points to doing that, but I mean,
yes, yes. If we're not disrupting, what are we doing? If we're not challenging, then what are we protesting? Like, it's a protest because it's a protest against the powers that be, whatever they may be.
so it's like, despite what you saw in Ottawa, folks, you cannot just simply go running into the streets, setting up hot tubs and live streaming your actions. For us, there will certainly be repercussions.
Yeah,
So,
just ask any land defender, you know, any land defender, the disproportionate response, and that was enraging for a lot of people on the left, and especially our Indigenous comrades that have to see the kid gloves. Again, this isn't in support of saying we needed the police to crack down or we wanted the police to crack down. We're just pointing out the gross hypocrisy in police and state response to the right wing versus anything deemed left. Again, it's not saying, oh, I wish the police had cracked down on Ottawa, because I don't. Um, I'm just saying there's a gross hypocrisy there. Um, so, yeah, that would explain the police response, is that most of them were on the side of them and realized that they weren't actually disrupting Capitol. So,
yeah, it's not a signal that all of a sudden the police have condoned, disruption or blockades of any sort. No.
if anything, it's an indictment on the state and the need for more left protesting. So, because we all know what that would have been like had that protest been left leaning of any kind. We know what the response would have been.
Oh, totally. And to that point, we didn't touch on it, and we totally should. So I'd be remiss not to. In our spaces, particularly when we take to the streets, there's a disproportionate threat to our Black and our Indigenous and our other racialized comrades.
Mm-hmm.
Any advice on how organizers, maybe just a couple tips that we can, it's not just enough to recognize that threat is increased for racialized comrades, but what can we do to mitigate that? I know, I've been to actions where a white shield, if it's logistically possible to have white people on the outside of the unit that you've created. But any other?
I kind of want to touch on that a little bit, if that's okay. The whole idea of the white shield. Is that okay? It's a little bit of a tangent, but again, this goes hand in hand with community care. As somebody who's considered a model minority by society or whatever, somebody who's clearly not white, but um, like so with the whole like white bodies to the front and what have you, you can also run into an issue of agency, and again the whole white savior thing, without any sort of kind of uh, community mindfulness of what we're actually doing there or what we're trying to accomplish there, right? So it's not that I disagree with people with less to lose, like in terms of historical oppression to the front, bearing the brunt of of police violence. It goes beyond that. It goes that mentality needs to be carried forth in day-to-day lives, not just as at an active protest that's being busted up by the cops. That includes, using your kind of privilege to educate as opposed to gotcha moments, where white people love their gotcha moments, where as opposed to doing actual education and organization. Um, and I would say that's not even a priority. The priority should be prioritizing understanding what you're doing on that day of that protest, what it's about, and asking how you can contribute, asking the organizers how you can contribute best, as opposed to, I'm going to do this because I think this is the best idea to do,
Just
using
forming a
my white
white
privilege.
vanguard at the front for all the
Exactly.
photos, right? That
Exactly.
kind of
Right.
imagery. Yeah.
Yeah. So check in with the organizers. At the end of the day, if we believe in non-hierarchical organization and activism, then that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't people to check in with. You know, this is the day that they're putting on for the community and helping to organize and keep people safe. Let's check in with the organizers and see what they want. If I am at a demo and an action that's run by all white people on behalf of another group in society, then first of all, I'm going to be really sus in the first place. I'm
So
going to
you
be like,
should be.
yeah. So I would always check in with organizers and see what they want in terms of what they can do to help marginalized and oppressed voices. On the day of and moving forward. Again, it's checking in, right? That's not to say this is kind of a sticky subject, and I don't know if this should go in or not. I don't know, but just as a personal, just because somebody is, just if you as a white person, just because somebody is saying to do something at a protest that's not white, doesn't mean that they're automatic. You should automatically, again, check in with organizers, right? You have a problem of mixed communication at protests when they get spicy. And again, always defer to organizers when possible.
And so that's a note for organizers too, like be visible.
Yeah, so the onus is on the organizers at that point, in my opinion. If they're not communicating, if they're not taking any security precautions, if they haven't spent the time to make sure that they're ready to educate before, leading up to, and during, and afterwards, then it's just not doing a real good job of community care in the first place. So again, that doesn't mean that all organizers are on the ball. It just means that it should be the job of organizers, in my opinion, to be on the ball.
And that's progress too. That's I mean, spreading this amongst our community, because I mean, you've taught me so much. So there's so much more that I will now do as an organizer that I would not have done before. And so now I take the onus on me. Obviously, through via this podcast, we will help people hear some of the things that they need to do. But in my spaces, I commit to having those discussions and coming to decisions to make the community safer. So I hope other folks do the same in their circles. And we're just going to wrap up here, but I want to give you the last word, obviously. Is there anything I did not ask you or something that you would like to share with people listening? Tangent or no tangent?
There might be. I don't have anything off the top of my head that jumps out. I just want to really stress that again. It can be really daunting to understand and to come to a lot of these realizations. And again, this kind of practice and attitude and kind of ways of approaching activism, again, doesn't come out of a vacuum. It's a learned thing, and you kind of nailed it there with it's progress, not perfection. As with anything else in activizing and activism and in our daily lives, we should really, really try to limit the amount of ego that we bring into spaces. Um, So if you happen to want to join an org or have joined an org or a movement, and a lot of what they're trying to goes against your daily, just take a moment before reacting and just let yourself sit with it and be like, okay, why are they asking this? Or just straight up ask and be open to other people's security and feelings of safety that you don't have are valid, right? So from experience. So I would just say if somebody is asking for more security or requesting that you take more precautions, it's not personal against you. There's obviously a reason that they're asking for it, and it's important. And who doesn't want to learn new stuff? We're progress, not perfection, right? So
I like that. Thank you so much for joining us, Noodle. Um, Again, I've learned so much. I hope the listeners have learned a lot.
can I add one more tangent? I'm so sorry. I'm so
Yes,
sorry.
yes, please
It's
do.
just like one more thing. I'm just reflecting on some of the things that I talked about in this conversation. I think I didn't cover some of the details that I wanted to, and then I went on too long with about other stuff. But that's okay. That's natural. It's supposed to be a natural conversation, right?
And it
So,
was, yeah.
thank you. And I think I just want to touch again on the fact that um, you know. Uh, I talked a little bit about, I didn't talk specifically much about different apps and direct things and, tools that we can use, which, there's a lot of information out there, and I'd be happy to, maybe answer some in text if there are any afterwards or anything, and provide some kind of resources and that kind of thing. But I guess the main thing is that all of these tools and tech and apps and security practices are only as good as the human aspect of it, right? So there's no point in me using all of the tools, like let's say secure app messaging app, secure email, secure documents, if the personal secure if like the personal practice of security is not practiced in your day-to-day life, as in taking screenshots of these secure chats and sending them to people who aren't in those groups, you know, sending screenshots with people's names visible, or a screenshot of an email that is supposed to be secure. All those security breaches that we see in activist circles, a lot of them are not actual technology infiltration. It's human infiltration or bad security practice. So again, all the tools that we use, just similar to any other kind of activity, whether it's driving or making your art or playing an instrument, it's only as good as the person who is trying to operate it. So keeping in mind that apps themselves aren't good enough, we just need to keep security in mind as a community going forward in the way that we interact in terms of political organizing. That's all, I guess. Yeah, it's, yeah. You can use Signal, but still be a complete security breach. Signal is not the answer to everything.
Well, like you said, like nothing's 100%, and that human factor, I guess my thought is the best way to mitigate that is the conversations that you talked about earlier, making it understood that this is community care and that we are built on trust. And so this is why we need you to behave this way and not breach the agreements that we've made, not take screenshots, and practice your security for us as a collective. So, yeah, I think
Absolutely, that's kind
that's
of
my
the main
biggest takeaway
takeaway.
is
Yeah,
there's a lot of
changing your mindset.
conversations. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
could go in the nitty gritty of how to use Signal. There's some good literature out there, it's called Signal Fails. Is one of them that comes to mind, and different apps and different ways of compartmentalization and that kind of stuff. But again, that technical knowledge, I'm not an expert on tech or anything really. I'm just somebody who's been doing this a while and has learned a lot through it and grown as a person too. So all these kind of concepts has made me grow as a person in terms of the way I interact with my community and view things. And that's the main takeaway. It's just what are we doing here? And how are we approaching activism in the first place? Is it individualistic, or is it genuinely community based?
That was perfect, Noodle. Thank you. Okay, I could have picked Noodle's brain there for hours. Obviously, there's plenty of more tools out there. Noodle just did not have time to share them all. I will post up some links after the episode airs on our Twitter account. The biggest takeaway from all that, I think, though, is that we do what we can to keep each other safe out there as we disrupt capitalism and smash the status quo. Be sure to listen in next Thursday as we keep learning from each other on all the diverse ways that we reach our communities, fight back against oppressive forces, and start to realize our collective power. Like in all things that we do, there is a team behind Blueprints of Disruption. I want to give a big thank you to our producers, Santiago, Hello Quintero, and Jay Woodruff. Our show is also made possible by the support of our listeners. So if you appreciate our content and would like to become a patron, please visit us at www.patreon.com/BP of Disruption. A heartfelt thank you to our first two patrons who had enough faith to subscribe even before our launch. So thank you, Ed Cunningham and Roger Moran, for your support. So if you know of any work that should be amplified or want to provide feedback of our show, please reach out to us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. Blueprints of Disruption is a project of New Left Media, an independent employee-owned company.